Hello, everybody. Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast. We are previewing the Oklahoma Sooners tonight as our 2022 Big 12 team previews continue. We have John Williams and we have Josh Helmer here to help us preview the Sooners for the year 2022. It's coming up right after this.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Once again, Josh Neighbors here with the two hosts of Locked On Sooners. It is John, it is Josh. I'm glad to have them with us tonight to preview Oklahoma. Gentlemen, I have to ask first, all right? Have you guys penciled all of the USC games into your schedule so you guys can watch all of them? Have you made sure they fit in with your Saturday afternoons? John, I'll go to you first on that one.
Well, I definitely made sure to retweet the Trojan Wire's schedule wallpaper from the Sooners Wire Twitter account so that our people would have that. And there are times where I definitely make mention of some different Trojans matchups or games that Oklahoma fans might want to tune into for sure.
Josh, is the pain worn off yet?
Yeah, I think so, though there's going to be that interest from Oklahoma fans all year long. They want to see Lincoln Riley and USC fail to a degree. And quite frankly, I don't know that this was the case to start with, but based on some comments that Carl Williams has made since Caleb Williams made the decision to transfer, I think kind of OU fans have started to turn the corner on their sort of looking for Caleb Williams to fail a little bit. And like I said, I don't think that was the beginning story for OU fans. I think initially OU fans kind of felt like, hey, we get it. You came to OU for Lincoln Riley. Your head coach leaves. You follow him. All of that makes sense. But there's a little Kevin Durant nature to all of this, I think, for Oklahoma fans.
Yes, somebody that, they don't feel great about. A lot of them don't feel great about either. So I think this year is really interesting for them because obviously it's interesting, generally, everything that's happened, but I do believe that there are kind of two schools of thought on the OU is better off with Brent Venables camp thing. I think I've talked about it with both of you guys, but John, we've talked about it a good amount. Like, they might be better off down the road having a guy who has recruited at that level, has gotten guys on defensive line at that level. It might take some time. But the thing is, Oklahoma's brand is so strong. The fact that not disastrous season, but kind of disastrous coaching situation has ended up with them getting the best coordinator in the country to be their coach, followed by maybe the second best coordinator in the country to come direct their offense and get his old quarterback who is an all-conference type player. Like, this just kind of goes to show you Oklahoma's going to be okay, right, John?
Yeah, it was everything that Bob Stoops said it would be, and
right.
He was the guy that was kind of leading the charge. Like, Oklahoma's going to be Oklahoma, whether Lincoln Riley's here or whoever the next guy is. That's always going to be Oklahoma, and it's been true. I mean, they've been one of the better programs in college football for the last 20 years plus since Bob Stoops took over in '99, and they've got one of the longest histories of success, dating back into the 40s, 30s, Benny Owen, all the way back to that stage of college football. And so, yes, it was a weird time that Sunday after Bedlam and everything that transpired after that. And I think there's a legit argument that they're going to be better off, not just this year or not just down the road, but even this year. I think turning over as much as they turned over, getting a guy who has the defensive chops that he has, combined with Jeff Lebby's ability to coordinate an offense, allowed them to attack the transfer portal to really fill holes and address needs that there might not be as much drop-off as people want to think. Now, yes, you got a lot of players that are stepping up in competition. We've talked about it on our show a little bit. But the coaching that they're going to be getting at Oklahoma is going to be better than what they got for Jeffrey Johnson at Tulane, for Dillon Gabriel the last couple of years at UCF. I mean, he gets to reunite with Lebby, who was his offensive coordinator during his freshman year, but then he had another couple guys after that. And so I think the whole of this coaching staff and the experience that they have makes up for a lot of the transition and the turnover that we saw from this roster and from this coaching staff after Lincoln Riley left, that it has a ton of people rightly optimistic, even though Oklahoma's being a little bit undersold in the preseason rankings, in the watch lists, in the the preseason Big 12 all conference team. But I think Oklahoma as a university, as a program, is okay with that being undersold a little bit. They want to be the team that kind of rises to the occasion and rises to greater expectations than most people had for them.
Josh, I want to ask you about the schedule, because this for me, so I'm not 110% sure what to expect from OU on the field, but I think that they're going to be a favorite in 11 of their 12 games. And I think that's big. So for me, I'll be honest, I picked them number one. I picked them to win the conference this year. And I'm actually not sure if I'm not sure if this was me signing off on OU. I think it was me signing off on obviously the brand of OU. And I believe in Brent Venables and Jeff Lebby and all that kind of stuff. But like, this schedule is really nice for them this year.
Yeah, it sets up great for Oklahoma. I mean, the fact that obviously you get Baylor and Oklahoma State. I mean, that for me, those are the two chief competitors for the Big 12 championship this season. I know everybody's, of course, high on Texas, and we'll see. Look, Quinn Ewers, maybe he's the truth. Maybe he is that next great Longhorns quarterback that we've been waiting all this time. Yeah, Sam Ehlinger was pretty good, but look, Ehlinger, I don't think you would put in that category of, say, a Colt McCoy or a Vince Young. I mean, Texas has been searching for that guy since then. And okay, maybe Quinn Ewers is that guy, but I need to see it first before I get there with Texas. I love what they have with B. John Robinson and, of course, Xavier Worthy. But to me, again, the two chief competitors, that's Baylor and Oklahoma State. And, oh, by the way, OU gets both of those two teams at home. They get Kansas State, who would be my sleeper type pick in the Big 12 Conference. They get Kansas State, again, in Norman. Now, history would tell you, at least of late, that maybe that's not great news for Oklahoma versus Kansas State. K-State, for whatever reason, has tended to play better and beat Oklahoma in Norman more often than that has happened in Manhattan, Kansas. But, yeah, I like how the schedule sets up. Which game do you have OU not as the favorite? Texas? I think they're going to be favorite in
I think they're dogs already in that game. Look, I think they should be favored. I mean, I think they should be, but the Vegas has them as an underdog at this point in time. But what I'm saying is, like, save that game. Like, they're going to be favorites in every other game. I will say, like, this is the Nebraska game I was actually looking more forward to, the one that's going to be in Lincoln. Our old friend Casey Thompson is going to be back playing in that one too, which should be really interesting. But everybody's trying to sell us on Nebraska. I totally expect Oklahoma to go in there. Let's talk about the offense. Let's go to the offense on this. So Jeff Lebby comes in. We've talked a lot about Dillon Gabriel. If you listen to the show at all, and look, if you follow the Big 12 at all, we've talked a lot about Dillon Gabriel. So we're not going to talk about as much about it. But John, we go to you first about this. The offensive line. That is where Oklahoma has been really successful. That's where Oklahoma teams, the great ones, have been built, especially across the last decade or so. Does this group have the chance to pick up maybe where, not where last year's group left off, but maybe former groups have left off? Because I don't think last year's offensive line was what we were accustomed to seeing from OU. And this is a pretty veteran group. So I think they've got a chance to be a really good line. Do you think that actually comes to fruition, John?
I do. I think the addition of McCade Matauer from Cal, adding him into the guard situation, possibly taking over at left guard for Marquise Hayes, who was drafted by the Arizona Cardinals. I think that creates a really good situation for him. Cal was actually one of Pro Football Focus's, I think, the number 26 run game, according to their grading scale last year. So not great, but also not bad. And he was a big part of that. And so a guy with a ton of experience, more than 1,700 snaps over 3 seasons at Cal, and he's going to slot right in. I mean, Bill Bedenbaugh said, we brought him here to be a starter. Obviously, he's got to earn it, but we want him to be the starter at left guard. And then at right tackle, it's going to be really, really interesting because you got several guys that are highly thought of. Wanye Morris, who came over from Tennessee last year, who was expected to compete for one of the tackle spots, but ended up basically becoming a rotational player. You got a guy like Savon Bird. There's so many guys that Oklahoma could throw out there at right tackle that you really don't know where the position stands at the moment, because there's several guys that could really assert themselves to be the right tackle for the Oklahoma Sooners this year. I do think the offensive line could be better. I think if they get in, Josh and I talked about this on our show earlier this week, if they can get into more of a downhill running style and not so focused on establishing the counter play, I think that mostly that'll benefit Oklahoma, because some of what happened with that run game last year is it just got too cute and teams caught up to the counter tray that Lincoln Riley just lived and died on. And that's fine that you have that as your bread and butter play. But when teams kind of sit on that and they know to expect it, it kind of takes away the effectiveness of it. I think the other issue with the offensive line from last year was that the quarterbacks just weren't getting the ball out on time. Even if they had good protection, they just weren't throwing the ball. Like they were just holding on to it. Some of that was due to the coverages they were facing, a lot of like 8-man drops from the opposing defensive units. And so Caleb Williams, Spencer Rattler, both, they would just hold on to the ball. And then it would lead to pressure and sacks and things like that. Obviously, the offensive line needs to be better than what it was last year, but there were times where the offensive line was pretty good and the quarterbacks failed them, or the offensive system failed them, where they didn't have an option in the short to intermediate route concept, and there was nowhere to go for the ball with the ball, and they're just standing back there 5, 6, 7 seconds, and then eventually they're throwing an incomplete pass or an interception or getting sacked, and we're all looking at the offensive line. Well, they got to protect better. Well, you can only protect for so long. If you're not getting the ball out in 3 to 5 seconds, that's a win for the defense, and the offensive line has already lost. So I think it's going to be better from that standpoint, because Jeff Lebby's going to play fast. And he's going to get the ball out of Dillon Gabriel's hand much quicker than what was happening last year.
And the weapons, Josh, I mean, this is a team that, I think it's a little bit more underplayed about how the weapons are going, but Theo Weiss and Marvin Mims are back, right? Braden Willis back at tight end. I'm really curious about the running back room, because I think the one thing when I watch Eric Gray play is, that Oregon game was a really strong game for him. He's kind of a guy who needs to do it both. Like, this is not a guy maybe who's going to be I'm not sure he's 25 carry guy, right? I'm not sure that's where he lives. You bring in a couple really good freshmen in, it's Gavin Sawchuk, right? And then also Javonte Barnes. I mean, 2 4-star guys, 2 your better recruits you're bringing in. Like, how do you see that playing out? And also, is there anybody, because I've always feel like there's a receiver who's maybe hidden on this Oklahoma team that we don't know about before the season, maybe comes in and does a really good job, or, shows signs of being a future a star maybe. Is there anybody in that? Let's talk about the running backs, maybe some guys at wide receiver that we don't know yet and we might know during the season.
So I'll start with part 2, which would be wide receivers. Oklahoma might have signed a couple of those guys late. The freshman signees, Jaden Gibson and Nick Anderson, those were late adds to Oklahoma's recruiting class when everything was in flux and Lincoln Riley had left the USC, and lo and behold, Cale Gundy, he was able to get these 2 in. Jeff Lebby, Brent Venables, everybody came in and kind of sealed the deal there on those 2 in December. And Oklahoma's been a program, Josh, that has had true freshmen come in, and wide receivers a position that in general true freshmen could come in and make that impact. But and be careful when I make this comparison here. I'm not saying these guys are going to be that guy, but CeeDee Lamb was somebody that was a true freshman recently at Oklahoma that made an immediate impact. Before him, you go just a little bit further back, and Kenny Stills was a guy that was an immediate impact true freshman at Oklahoma. So I look at maybe both Jaden Gibson and Nick Anderson, one of those 2 guys, potentially as a wide receiver to keep an eye on. We'll see how that transpires. Jaleel Farooq, there's a lot of folks with Oklahoma that are excited about the fact that he was the leading receiver in the Valero Alamo Bowl. Now, granted, that was kind of all you really got in the receiving department last year out of Jaleel Farooq was that one bowl game, but those would be 3 names to keep an eye on right there in terms of the receivers. At running back, I think you hit on something that John and I have spent a little bit of time discussing ourselves. I don't know how dialed in you were to all of this a year ago, but one of the big talking points with OU was, okay, Kennedy Brooks, he took this opt year out for the COVID season. Is Kennedy Brooks going to be able to come back in and be this Kennedy Brooks that was a 2-time 1,000-yard rusher? And, I was kind of always in the camp, look, I feel better about Kennedy Brooks than I do Eric Gray transferring over from Tennessee. That's not to say that Eric Gray can't be great at Oklahoma, but ultimately it kind of did play out exactly like that. Those 2 split carries early, but before long, it was pretty clear Kennedy Brooks was the clear number 1 running back on Oklahoma. I say that to get to this point. There was almost more concern, I think, from the Oklahoma fan base collectively for OU's running backs going into 2021. I'm way more concerned with that group going into 2022. Now, is Oklahoma going to struggle to find a running back before it's all said and done? I doubt it. Probably either Javonte Barnes or Gavin Sawchuk if they need to be. by season's end can be a difference maker. But I'm a little bit concerned early about either Eric Gray or Marcus Major being this Kennedy Brooks type force for Oklahoma.
Yeah, I mean, I think Eric Gray, if you get him in space, it's great, but it's kind of getting him there is the issue, especially in the running game for him. And then, John, I'll let you real fast. Just, Dillon Gabriel, we're all kind of bought in. Look, you guys, I've said this to John, Josh, you'll learn this too. I own a lot of property on Spencer Sanders Island. I'm still holding on to said property. I really believe that talent-wise, he can like what we saw in the Notre Dame game, we can see that more often. I put Dillon Gabriel as my first team quarterback to start the year. There is nobody telling me out here. Nobody can tell me this. Out of all the quarterbacks coming to the league this year, he is the most proven by far. He is the best, most well-rounded, most well-proven quarterback that we have seen across the board, no matter, experience level, talent level. You take it all, put it together, leadership. He's the one that stands out to me. So, John, everybody's on board. Leader, everybody loves him. Yes.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like the day that he committed to Oklahoma, it was just several hours after Caleb Williams entered the transfer portal. And from that moment, it was like everybody was bought in, sold on Dillon Gabriel, and the coaching staff didn't play around with it either. As soon as they could first address it with the media, they said, Dillon Gabriel's our starter. Like we're not going to there's not a quarterback competition. He's our starter.
Very un-Lincoln of them to do that, right?
Yes, it was a far cry from the previous regime. We're not going to have this faux quarterback competition. We know who's going to be our starter. We're not going to try and call the fans dumb. But anyway, and I think from that moment, everybody's been bought in, sold in, on what he's going to bring to the program. And there's been nothing this spring or summer that has swayed that opinion. I think everybody is still just really, really high and has really high expectations for what he's going to accomplish this year for the Oklahoma Sooners. I think there will be games where there are challenges. Is it going to be a perfect season for him? No. There's really good defenses in the Big 12 this year, unlike in years past. There will be tests against teams like Baylor and Oklahoma State and West Virginia and at times Iowa State. I mean, this is a tough league. It's not the same league that we saw 2-3 years ago. And so I think there are going to be games where maybe he doesn't have a 60% completion percentage, but Oklahoma is able to win it because he is making some big throws, hitting some big plays down the field to Marvin Mims, and Oklahoma is able to overcome some of the defensive pressure they might see this year. But I think everything that he brings to the table is exactly what Oklahoma needed in the wake of Spencer Rattler transferring, Caleb Williams transferring. They needed a guy that kind of came in with not a lot of flash, not a lot of style to him. Like he just was kind of flying under the radar for a long time. Only recently have we seen him post much on social media, and it's these gatherings he's been having with his pass catchers. He had a big get together for a weekend, and then he had another one with his offensive linemen where he got them all together. And you're starting to kind of see some of those videos come out where he's just hanging out with his dudes, just being bros being bros. And I think that's cool. Like he doesn't have a big, look at me presence. He's just ready to go play ball. And all of the reports out of Norman about this kid are very, very positive. And we're really excited for what he's going to bring to the table.
All right, defense. So last year, the numbers just piled up in the negative category. 79th against explosive plays, 83rd in finishing drives on defense, 63rd in defensive efficiency. We thought that was going to be the group. And honestly, I mean, they lost a lot to the NFL. It's funny how disappointing that defense was, Josh, but how many guys they end up putting in the league. I think the first question Oklahoma fans have is this team going to tackle? Like, are they going to get to the football as a group and finish plays off? Because I'll tell you what, that group last year, think about that Tulane game, I think it was like the perfect example. And look, that game kind of set the tone, right? I mean, that stuff happened all year long for OU's defense. Are they going to tackle this year under Brent Venables? It sounds like they're getting after it in practice in ways they hadn't in the past.
Oh, and let me tell you, that is music to Oklahoma fans' ears. And this is not, even when Oklahoma, which it's worth pointing out, Oklahoma did take steps in the right direction initially with Alex Grinch. They did. Some Sooner fans forget about that here of late, based on the way that 2021 played out and some of the items that you mentioned, which Yeah, they were not a great defensive team a year ago. I mean, defensively against the pass, Oklahoma was, I want to say 109th nationally. They were definitely in that 100 and below mark, which there's no excuse for Oklahoma to be ranked that low, really in any defensive category.
They're 109th. You're correct. 109th.
In terms of a skill defensive category, too, it's like you think you would get players to Oklahoma that can go cover guys a little bit, but obviously Oklahoma really struggled in that department. You hit on the other piece that has bothered Oklahoma fans again for so long. And again, even the years that OU was quote unquote better or good defensively, tackling on so many different occasions has just been that nails on the chalkboard feeling for Sooner fans that why can this program that has a championship history, a rich history in so many different eras, why can they not get guys that can get dudes on the ground? Why can they not wrap up? Why can they not tackle? And one of the common complaints from OU fans was, well, if you don't practice tackling in practice, probably you're not going to be a good tackling team. And the early returns is that, okay, maybe practices have been a little bit more physical for Oklahoma. And I know that every OU fan is really hoping that's the case.
And then, specifically John here with the, not a ton of experience on defense coming back, but they do have a couple guys that really do stick out to you. Obviously Jalen Redmond on the defensive line sticks out. Deshaun White, and then people were talking about Danny Stutzman. They think he might be, one of the guys to watch at linebacker in this conference. And in the secondary, DJ Graham, Woody Washington, Key Lawrence. So this is a group that maybe not the most proven. They have a lot to go, but it's not that they don't have playmakers.
Yeah, there's a lot of talent on this defense. It's just been sitting behind also a lot of talent. Especially you look at the edge position, you got guys like Reggie Grimes, Marcus Strickling, Ethan Downs. They were sitting behind Nick Bonito, Isaiah Thomas, Ronnie Perkins for several years. So it's going to be hard for those guys to get on the field with that much talent ahead of them on the depth chart. You talked about the defensive secondary. I think that's the place where they might be there might be some question mark, but I think there's guys, you mentioned the three, Woody Washington, DJ Graham, and Key Lawrence, but Justin Broyles, I think, is a guy that came on strong toward the end of the season last year. Delaware Turner Yell's, his guy to break out for the secondary in 2022. The linebacker core is probably the unit we know the most about because you are returning Deshaun White. You are returning David Agwebu, who was a Butkus Award watch list, mention. And then you talk about Danny Stutzman, but then they got three, guys that came in their recruiting class, and Kip Lewis, Kobe McKenzie, and Jaron Kanak as well, who people are very, very high on and think could potentially make an impact in that linebacker rotation. So it's a unit that we don't know a ton about. We know about certain guys, Woody Washington, but he spent a lot of last year injured. DJ Graham, I thought he was going to really have a breakout season going into 2021, and he was just up and down. He was a roller coaster ride all season long, and his game against Oregon left a lot to be desired. It was not great. And then, Key Lawrence was probably one of their best playmakers down the stretch. Just his physicality, the edge that he brought in playing that box safety role, I think is going to be really, really big for Brent Venables' defense. But then along the defensive line, I think there are guys that are going to be really, really good. And I mentioned one earlier, and that's Jeffrey Johnson. I think this guy is going to be one of the unsung heroes of this defense going for 2022 because he plays a nose tackle, that one technique defensive tackle position it's not going to rack up a lot of tackles for loss, a lot of sacks, but he's going to create opportunities for other players because of his size and his ability. It's just going to eat up space. He's going to, demand double teams from opposing offensive lines. And I think he'll be a very key part of this Oklahoma Sooners defense. When we look back at the end of the season, we'll think, man, Jeffrey Johnson, he didn't fill up the stat book, but he was huge for this team.
All right, guys, prediction time. What do you guys think Oklahoma's record is? Do they make the Big 12 championship game, et cetera, et cetera? Josh, you're up first.
I think they're going 12-1, and I think they're winning the Big 12 championship. And if you take that one step further to the college football playoff, I'm not ready to predict that they're winning a college football playoff game yet. Maybe they're a little bit more competitive in that scenario than in years past. I just really think, John touched on something earlier that I think is important to revisit here. There's this national perception that Oklahoma, well, it's year one for Brent Venables. It's going to take all this time to get these systems in place and this and that. Oklahoma fans, look, there might be a very minute minority that is of the mindset, well, it's Brent Venables' first season. The expectation around Norman is not, well, it's year one, so if they lose a couple of games, that'll be okay. The expectation is the rest of the Big 12, Oklahoma is still better than the rest of the Big 12. And, oh, by the way, they've got a schedule that sets them up to where their non-conference game is versus a Nebraska team that, okay, I get it. They played 8 one-score games a season ago. They also went 3-9. So you shouldn't be losing.
They're really good at losing is what they were.
They have a good habit of losing football games. So you ought to be able to handle that. And then again, as we touched on earlier, all of your tough conference games, save for obviously the Red River Shootout, they're at home. They're in Norman. So this is a schedule that is set up for Oklahoma and for Brent Venables in year one with Dillon Gabriel, a guy that's thrown 8,000 passing yards in his career and 70 touchdowns. OU set up to go win this conference and get their crown back. So I think they do that in 2022 here. And I think they probably, if this is the last year in the Big 12, I think they head off into the SEC feeling pretty good about the run they had in the Big 12 conference.
John, your prediction for this year?
Yeah, I also see them winning the Big 12. I think it's going to be a one-loss season just because it's a tough league. There's one game that's going to jump up and get them. But I do think this is going to be a team that maybe starts off a little bit, slow out of the gate. They might not be as dominant as they are towards the end of the season. I think, as Josh mentioned, as both of you have mentioned, the schedule is nice. Like, you get your toughest games at home. Red River Showdown that's always a coin flip. Whether you're favored, whether you're the underdog, it doesn't matter in that game. It's crazy how it turns out all year long. TCU is going to be a tough game, I think, going down there to Fort Worth. And then you have the late season road trip to Iowa State and Ames. Thankfully, that's going to be on a Saturday. It's probably going to end up being a Saturday night game, but it's a tough place to play. And then you got to go to Morgantown too. So you got games on the schedule that definitely have the opportunity to jump up and get you if you're not careful. But I don't think that focus is going to be something that Brent Venables' Oklahoma Sooners are going to have an issue with in his first year or any season. Like, this is going to be a team that's locked in, because if you're not locked in, any one of those players is not locked in every single day, they're not going to play. He's going to be looking for guys that are going to be giving, that 110% effort every single time that they're in the classroom, in the film room, in the training facility, on the practice field, or getting a game snap. It doesn't matter. So this is going to be a team that I think everything has just kind of been ratcheted up. And as Brent Venables has said, he's looking to figure out how to take this team from good, this program from good, and make it great. Because they did do some good things during the Lincoln Riley era. But I think there were times that obviously it was underwhelming. It never reached the heights that people thought it could. And Brent Venables is here now to make sure that intensity stays from day one of spring ball all the way through the end of the 2022 season.
I had put in today, guys, my over ticket on Oklahoma's win total, 8.5. I don't have
quite money right there.
Yeah, I didn't have them quite as high as you guys. I think I have them 9 or 10 probably as they end up at. But yeah, I think they win the league this year. All right, guys, time for plugs. Where can people find you and all of your all's work? I'll go to you first, Josh.
Check me out right there on the Ref Sports Radio Network, obviously with John as well, Locked On Sooners. Check us out. Easy to find us on YouTube. Just search us, Locked On Sooners. Any podcast platform that you listen, Locked On Sooners. For all of our OU fans, or maybe some of you Texas fans out there that are just looking for an avenue to get triggered, radio side, Plank Show, Monday through Friday, 9 to noon on the Ref in OKC.
Yeah, we certainly love the hate watch. We love the hate listen.
Love the hate watch. We know
please.
Love it too. Yeah.
I had a lot of USC fans in the early the wintertime, the early spring, doing some hate watching. So yeah, feel free to let us know how you feel about the show over there on Locked On Sooners on YouTube. And you can also read my work covering the Sooners over at SoonersWire.com.
Awesome. All right, guys, thank you so much for helping me cover preview the Sooners' high expectations. We'll see how it goes this year.